The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not just a little campfire smoke, but a thick, heavy blanket of acrid air that scratched at the back of your throat. It was the smell of a forest in a panic. I was out on my porch late that afternoon, just finishing up some work on a broken fence line, when I saw the sky turning this impossible shade of orange. It was the color of a furnace. You know, the kind of color that doesn't exist in a normal sunset. I live a good 20 miles from the nearest small town out here in the foothills. For me, the quiet is the whole point. But that day the quiet was gone, replaced by a low, persistent growl that wasn't thunder. It was the sound of a forest on fire, a sound that carries a primal weight. It makes your bones feel like they're buzzing. My friend Jake called me a few minutes later, his voice all static and urgency. He said, "The fire's moving fast, Tom. The wind is pushing it right up your canyon. You need to pack a bag and get out of there now." I told him I wasn't going anywhere. This old cabin, this land, this is my home. My father built it. My grandfather before him. It's not just a house, it's a part of me. I told him I'd stay and fight it off. The fire crews, they were a good distance away, and the smoke was so thick it was hard to see the end of my own driveway. I knew it was a stupid idea, but I couldn't bring myself to abandon this place. I grabbed a few buckets and the old garden hose. I had a small well I could use to fight off any embers that landed on the roof. The next hour was a blur of smoke and panic. I was soaked in sweat, my eyes stinging, my lungs burning. I kept checking the tree line behind my house, and it was a wall of angry red and black. It was so close you could feel the heat on your skin. I felt a real honest-to-God terror. The kind of terror that makes you forget your own name. I was standing on the porch watching the inferno when I saw them. At first I thought it was just the smoke playing tricks on my eyes, but then they moved. A mother lynx and her 3 cubs. They were right there on the other side of my sliding glass door, their faces pressed against the glass. The mother was a big, beautiful creature, all tufted ears and piercing yellow eyes. But those eyes weren't fierce, they were exhausted and full of a kind of deep-seated fear I had never seen in a wild animal before. Her body was tense, her muscles trembling. She looked like she had run a marathon through hell. The 3 cubs were smaller than a house cat, all big paws and wide, innocent eyes. They looked skinny, their fur matted with ash and dirt. Their little noses were twitching and their mouths were open slightly in a silent gasp. They were hungry. You could see it in the way they looked at me. It wasn't aggression, it was desperation. They weren't seeing a human, they were seeing a possible source of food, a potential safe haven. They had nowhere else to go. My first thought was to panic. I mean, there was a wild predator on my porch. But that thought was quickly drowned out by a wave of something else. Empathy. Looking at them, I just felt this profound sadness. They had lost everything, their home, their forest, their hunting grounds. And now they were at my door begging for help. My own fear for my home, for my life, it suddenly felt selfish. I was fighting for a building. They were fighting for survival. It was a completely different scale. I slowly backed away from the door and went into the kitchen. I didn't have much. Just a few cans of chicken and some leftover beef jerky. I knew it was a long shot, but I had to try. I went back to the door and carefully slid it open, just a tiny crack. The mother lynx let out a low growl, a warning, but she didn't move. She was too tired. I spoke to her in a low, gentle voice. "I know you're scared," I said. "I won't hurt you. I just want to help." I knelt down and slowly pushed a small bowl of the canned chicken through the crack. The mother's eyes locked onto mine, a long, searching look. The moment stretched on, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. Then she took a step forward and sniffed the air, her gaze never leaving my face. The cubs were right behind her, whimpering. She took a tiny bite of the chicken, then another. Once she was sure it was safe, she nudged the bowl toward her cubs. They descended on it in a frenzy. The fire was still roaring in the distance. The air was a hazy brown, and the world felt like it was ending. But on my porch, in the middle of this madness, there was a small family of lynxes finally getting a moment of peace. I knew I couldn't just keep feeding them from my kitchen. They were a wild family, and I was in over my head. But they couldn't stay here either. The fire was too close. The whole area was a death trap. I knew I had to call Jake again. He was a wildlife biologist. He would know what to do. The problem was getting him here. The roads were officially closed. The smoke was too thick to fly a helicopter. I called him, and I could barely hear his voice over the static and the sound of my own panic. "Jake," I said, "I need your help. I have a situation here." He said, "Tom, I told you to get out of there. What are you doing?" "I'm still here," I said, "but I'm not alone. I have a family of lynxes on my porch. There's a mother and 3 cubs, and they're starving and they're trapped." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, just the sound of the static. Then Jake said, "You're kidding me, right?" I said, no, Jake, I'm not. I'm looking at them right now. They're all covered in soot, and they're so skinny. The mother trusts me enough to let her babies eat. I don't know what to do. Jake was quiet for a moment, a long moment where I could feel his brain working. He said, okay, Tom, listen to me very carefully. Do not try to touch them. Do not get too close. I need to get there, but the roads are a mess. I'm going to try and get a special permit from the fire department. It's going to take some time. You just keep them fed and keep them calm. I know you don't have much, but whatever you have, just give it to them. Keep them on the porch. Do you hear me? I said, I hear you, Jake. Just hurry. The next few hours were the longest of my life. The sun set behind a wall of fire, painting the sky a terrifying shade of scarlet and black. I brought out some water in a small pan, and the mother drank from it thirstily. The cubs just watched, their little bellies now a little fuller. I sat in my living room with the lights off, just watching them through the glass. The mother laid down and curled her body around the cubs, protecting them from the cold night air and the glow of the fire. They were sleeping now, finally getting some rest. I felt an incredible connection to them, a feeling of responsibility. It was no longer about my house or my own safety. It was about theirs. I must have dozed off because I woke up to a loud knocking on my door. It was well after midnight, and the fire was a little bit more contained, but still a menacing presence on the horizon. I opened the door, and there was Jake, his face covered in soot, his eyes red and tired. He was wearing a fire-resistant jacket and a helmet. He had a large metal crate with him. He said, okay, Tom, we don't have much time. I had to talk my way through about a dozen checkpoints. We need to get them in this crate and get them out of here before the wind shifts again. I said, they're on the porch. They've been sleeping. The mother is there with the cubs. Jake and I moved slowly and quietly. The mother lynx woke up instantly, her ears twitching and her eyes glowing in the dark. She stood up and let out a low hiss, her instincts telling her to protect her babies. Jake spoke in a calm, reassuring voice. We're here to help, he said. We're not going to hurt you. He slowly pushed the crate with the door open onto the porch. He put a piece of meat inside the crate to lure the cubs. The mother watched us with an intensity that was both terrifying and heartbreaking. Her cubs were whimpering and scared. I knelt down and looked at her right in the eyes. I said, please, I know you're scared, but this is the only way. We have to go now. The moment stretched on. The firelight flickered in her eyes. I held my breath, waiting for her to attack, waiting for her to run, waiting for anything. Then she did the most incredible thing. She nudged one of her cubs toward the crate. It was a sign of trust, an act of surrender born out of pure desperation. One by one, the cubs scrambled into the crate, drawn by the scent of the meat. The mother stood guard outside, watching us. Once all three were inside, Jake quickly and gently closed the door. The mother let out a pained cry, a sound of pure agony. My heart broke for her. We had to do something about her. We couldn't leave her. Jake said, we have to try to get her in too. I said, I'll try. I took the remaining canned chicken and slowly put it on the edge of the crate. I spoke to her again. We're not going to take your babies away forever, I promised. We're just going to help them. We're going to get you all to safety. It was a long shot, a prayer I was sending out into the smoky night. But she listened. She was exhausted and terrified, and she was out of options. She slowly walked to the crate, and Jake was ready. In one quick motion, he managed to secure her in a smaller cage he had brought. It was over. We had them all. The sound of their cries in the cages was gut-wrenching, but I knew it was the right thing. We loaded the cages into Jake's truck. The fire was still burning, but now there was a small glimmer of hope in the darkness. I watched as Jake drove away, the red taillights disappearing into the smoke. A week later, the fire was contained. I was finally able to get a proper night's sleep. Jake called me on a clear, sunny morning. He said, Tom, the lynxes are doing great. They're at a rehabilitation center 100 miles from here. They're all healthy and safe. The mother is fierce, but she is finally eating and resting. We named her Hope, because that's what she gave us, and that's what she represents. He said they'll be released back into a safe part of the wild once they've recovered and they've been given a clean bill of health. I hung up the phone and I just sat there for a long time. The smell of the smoke was finally gone, replaced by the scent of pine and fresh earth. And I knew that something had changed in me forever. That night, I had fought for more than just my home. I had fought for a family of animals, and in doing so, I had found a piece of my own humanity I didn't even know was missing.